I'm Will Marquis with PYREG and Brecc Avellar, and we want to talk about a couple of different aspects to a successful biochar project. And what we see very often is a lot of attention paid to the equipment, the pyrolysis equipment, the gasification equipment, but for a successful project, it's really the sum of the parts. All of the pieces need to work well together, and that's what we're going to talk about with you. Sorry, too many slides. One of the first things that I get when I get a call, people ask me, well, I've got 100,000 tons of wood waste and I need to process it and I need 12 of your machines. And the first question is, what kind of biochar do you want to make? All the OEM manufacturers that are here at the show make a different tool. And that tool will produce different types of biochar. And it's important that you think about what markets you want to sell that biochar to. You want to understand what kind of biochar you're going to make, because if you can't make a biochar that's super high carbon content, you're going to have very different markets open to you. If your biochar, or excuse me, your feedstock has heavy metals contaminants, you can't sell that into the soils markets or soil amendment markets. So it's really important that you understand what kind of biochar you want to make and then start to look for the technology that will produce that type of biochar from your feedstock. And that's where I think a lot of people get sideways when they start talking about, well, it's all the same, right? No, it's not. You're going to have very different conversion rates. You're going to have very different quality. You're going to have very different surface area, all those things. And it's really important that you go slow before you start to make decisions about your equipment. These projects are too expensive, and we don't want projects to fail. You don't want projects to fail. So we want to help you with that. I would rather recommend a competitor of ours because it's a better tool for your job than say, oh, sure, we can do that. And we kind of get it. You know, we kind of get there, but your project isn't as successful as it could be. That doesn't do you any favors, and it doesn't do us any favors. So when you have those thoughts and you're thinking about what kind of a project you want to have, make sure you talk with the OEMs that you're considering and say, hey, can you test my feedstock? I want to get a sample of what kind of biochar your equipment would make. We do that all the time, and most of the equipment manufacturers will do that for you. There's a cost associated with it, but it's a pretty low cost to pay before you spend $3, $4, $5, $6 million on a project. You want to know those and have that data so that you really understand what kind of biochar you're going to produce. All of that ultimately impacts the financials of your project and the survivability of your project. Oh, that's funky. I guess my slide didn't translate well. Sorry, my little feedstock to biochar to process triangle. Again, what kind of biochar do you want to make, and why do you want to make that? All the feedstocks are different. We test feedstocks from all over the world. We've seen blue spruce tested from Colorado that has very different qualities from blue spruce tested in Europe or grown in Europe. Why is that? Soils are different, growing conditions are different. And so it's really important, again, that testing. What is your goal for the project, and test that feedstock. All of these pieces tie into what does your project need for equipment. Yes, we make the pyrolysis equipment, but you're going to have a lot of other pieces to that project. Conveyance equipment, potentially a dryer, a shredder, pre-treatment for the feedstock. What's your biochar bagging system going to look like? Is it bulk transfer? Are you putting it in a silo, or are you putting in a bagging system for super sacks or even retail bagging? There's so many different aspects to the system, and your project will only be as successful as its weakest link. And it's really important that your partners, whoever you're buying equipment from, can help ensure that the engineering is done in a way where each of those processes, each of those inflection points in your process are engineered together. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brecc, who's going to talk about specifics of the equipment.
All right. Thank you, Will. Yeah, I want to use an example here. Of course, we're with PYREG, so I'm going to use the PYREG example. And we've developed this basis of design here as relatively generic, but I think this can apply for specific cases as well with a little bit of tweaking. So what I want to walk through is just a quick overview of what Will's referring to when we're talking about a full-out system. PYREG is only one part of that, to Will's point, but you've got a lot of material, a lot of things on the front end, receiving of your raw material, processing of your raw material. You have a lot of operations around drying. Some processes require pre-drying. PYREG does, others don't. Then there's the pyrolysis step itself. I'm going to use PYREG as the example. There's heat recovery, emissions management, and biochar collection. So all of these are really important as you go through these. There we go. Yeah, so talking just quickly about feedstock receiving. A lot of times your feedstock, to Will's point, is coming from a wide variety of different sources, and not even all wood chips are the same. So it's very important to pay attention to how are you going to process your feedstock. Are you going to grind it? Are you going to mill it? Are you going to mix it with a variety of feedstocks? What sort of screening do you need to consider? Where are the screening rejects going to go? So a lot of these feedstock receiving and processing is really important. And I encourage you to consider that very, very closely as you're looking at your process design and engineering. Drying is the next step. For a lot of people, and I'm sure you've heard some of the talks this week, they talk about you have to dry the material. And the more dry the feedstock is, the more efficient the gasification or the pyrolysis will be. And so it's very important to pay attention to the way you want to pre-treat your feedstock prior to it going into your gasifier or your pyrolysis device. So proper heat application. One of the things that a lot of people forget about is the first source of pollutant, first source of air emissions, and I refer to it also as the first source of stink, if you're processing manure or biosolids, is your dryer. So you really need to pay attention to your dryer and what are its emissions, how are you going to apply the heat, how are you going to manage that. One of the things that's really important in a pyrolytic or gasification system is having a very dry material being fed. So dry product recycle in the dryer is very important, because if you don't have thoroughly dry material, you have to re-dry it. And having dry product recycle, we find, is a very important step. And dry product storage, very, very important. You don't want to have to shut down your gasification or pyrolysis step because your dryer stopped. You want to have some intermediate storage so that you can disaggregate those two units in operational logistics. Now the pyrolysis, right? A lot of pyrolysis systems are batch fed. I'm not really talking about those here. They're very important tools, as Will described. Many times a batch fed process is the way to go. We're talking here about continuous processes. So it's very important to have metered feed. And so if your drying system has to have a lot of recycle, you're going to have a lower feed. So that's why it's very important to have metered feed to your gasification or your pyrolysis system. One of the things that we consider is a pyrolysis system has indirect application of heat, whereas a gasification system, I say, has direct application of heat. And to Will's point, the quality and the type of biochar that you're going to produce from a gasification system where the combusted flue gas is in direct contact with your charring feedstock, that material is going to process differently and come out differently than a process that has indirect application of heat. And I can talk more about that later, but you need to think about that, because the type of system you choose is really going to speak to the type of biochar and the way that biochar is going to be produced. All of it relates to time at temperature, ultra-low oxygen. These are things that are important in a pyrolysis and a gasification system. Biochar collection is really important. A lot of people skip over that. Oh, well, we'll just put it in a bunker. Well, then you have to have dust management. How are you going to pick it back up again? How are you going to get it to your customer? So super sacks are often assumed, but bunkers and silos can be a better way to go. I encourage you, think about how you're going to deal with your biochar collection. Very important. And then, of course, heat recovery. I'm sure you've heard the presentations this week on ORCs and other heat recovery systems. We really encourage you to look at heat recovery. Very, very important. And equally very important is your emissions management, not just from the pyrolysis or gasification system, but from the entire process. Do you need just a baghouse? Or do you need a wet scrubber or a thermal oxidizer? What do you need to manage your emissions? So that's just a quick walk through the process. I'm going to turn it back over to Will to wrap up.
So, as it says here, the success of your project is really going to be determined by all of these parts. CapEx, the cost to build the plant with all of the ancillary equipment, and that includes the EPCs, the engineering that's done ahead of time. One thing we always talk about is planning for the future and scaling. So if we recommend a firm approach of crawl, walk, run. Start with the smallest project that's financially viable. Make your mistakes when your CapEx is small, but plan for the future. Lay out your site so that your expansion plans can be easily implemented. What are your annual costs? Feedstock, labor, utilities, maintenance, really critical pieces to that, and that all comes together in the IRR. What is your equipment performance? How much biochar are you going to produce? What are the revenues? How much biochar do you need to make, and what price can you sell it at? What are your capital costs for loans, your capital stack, grants, equity investment? Where are you going to get the capital to do it? We get lots of a lot of people have very good ideas, but if you can't put the equity together, if you can't put the financing together, it becomes a dream. And dreams are very frustrating. We want projects, we want you to be successful, we want to help you do that, but you got to spend a lot of time firming up those equity plans and putting the capital stack together. And there's, fortunately, as this business grows, there's entities that will help you. You've heard from some of them this week. It all creates a spider's web, and each strand impacts the financial performance of your project. If your feedstock cost is too high, you're never going to make money. If your labor costs are too high, if your CapEx is too high. Conversely, if you can, find those high quality offtakes and those high value offtakes, that'll drive a lot of revenue for you and drive a lot of IRR. So it all comes together, and you need to understand, and this is for each system you're evaluating, you want to go through all of these pieces. So if you're talking to PYREG and you're talking to, BET or somebody else, you want to go through this entire process with your pro forma for each of these, so that you understand you're making whatever decision you make, it's the best one for you and your feedstock and the biochar you're going to produce. We wish you all the luck, best of luck. If we can answer any questions, we're happy to do so. And we'll be back in the exhibit hall if you need us.